So I'm here with Hugh Edwards, who has just finished directing our Reigate Grammar first live streamed performance. So in this weird COVID year, theatre has obviously had to adapt, Hugh. And I wondered what your experience was about rehearsing something that is going to be live streamed.
Yeah, it's a new world, really, isn't it? It's something that we don't really fully understand, I think it's fair to say, at the moment. That's part of the reasoning behind this production, was to have an experiment and to see what was possible within, first of all, within the school bubble, as opposed to in the theatre. It's very hard for theatres to commercially open at the moment, we know that. But we're in a sort of unique position here where we're allowed to be open in a different way. And this play seemed like the perfect thing because it was COVID proof in a way, in that it's about characters interacting online. So the plan was that if the worst happened and the school closed again, we'd be able to do it on Zoom, on Teams, on whatever platform it was. We'd be able to have a go at it, being as how the characters are sort of separate from each other. But it's also about how we communicate online. So it seems like it's a perfect play to investigate now, as people are spending more and more forced time communicating with friends, with family, with strangers online. It's kind of a cautionary tale for our times. Mm-hmm. It seemed like a good, seemed like the right thing to do for so many reasons.
Mm-hmm. And so it was written in 2005.
Yeah, 2005. It was an NT Connections play originally, or National Youth Theatre. Yeah.
And so I wondered if you talked to the cast at all about like how their relationship with technology has developed since kind of on the online world of 2005.
Yeah, it's amazing how much they didn't recognise at all in a play that's only 15 years old. The references to webcams, they're sort of obsolete because everyone's got their phones, and references to stars in their eyes. They didn't understand all the cultural references, were sort of went over their head. But they were able to educate me on what the modern equivalent is.
So I learned the modern equivalent this morning from my fourth form.
Yeah.
Is house party.
A house party was something that came up a lot because you can talk to strangers, which is essentially, I don't know if you remember the old MSN chat rooms and things like that.
No, I had friends.
Oh, well, I absolutely didn't. So, coming up in 2005 as I did.
Of course, I've been teaching for 5 years.
You would quite often you'd go to somewhere where you'd find your tribe. So it would be a Harry Potter chat room or a Manchester United chat room, whatever it was. You'd go there, and nominally people would be there for the same reason, sort of like teenage speed dating. Put people in the same place and see what happens. But we tried to find the modern equivalent, and we tried out whether it was they're all playing FIFA and chatting on the side or whatever it is. And we settled on Discord as being the gaming platform where people do actually have voice chat without video, because it's quite rare to find a non-video setting. And we didn't want it to be about their faces. We wanted it to be about the mismatch between our physical persona and what we say online, because we're all, I think, guilty sometimes of having that mismatch, of being fully able and not frightened to say something in a safe, anonymous online forum, but the moment you get face to face with someone or you have eye contact, then suddenly your convictions are not so strong. And I think that's something we've seen through the various elections that have happened over the last few years, and this kind of general drift towards people being polarised. I think social media's got a lot to do with that. I think this sort of environment can be incredibly toxic, and I think that's the caution of the play.
So how did that kind of, the restrictions that we have to put in place as a school in rehearsal, because we've got different year groups teching the show at the moment.
Yeah, we've gone through two.
How did that work in rehearsal? And then also, I watched the live performance on Monday. We can talk about that in a minute, about that experience of watching theatre with a mask on. But like, how in rehearsal did the kind of COVID bubbling and school restrictions work? What was different from a normal room where, you know, you've got that freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, theatre in schools is one place where traditionally one of the attractive parts of it is the ability and you have the permission to hang out with people who aren't in your year group, I suppose. You have.
Yeah, it's really important, that vertical pastoral care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You look up to the people who are in the older years, and you're sort of bonding with people in lower years over whatever you're doing, and you're moving together towards a common goal with those people. So it's one of the main sort of rocks of the co-curricular programme, and of course one of the main restrictions at the moment, and we've gone through a few levels of restrictions, but one of the main ones is that we're not supposed to be mixing different year groups in bubbles. So from the very start we had to very closely risk assess that to see if it was still possible, and then to see how we could manage that risk as much as possible. So from the start of rehearsals, because we have 3rd, 4th, 5th, lower 6th and upper 6th involved in the cast and crew, and we had zones in the room, literally discs on the floor, different coloured zones. The red zone is the 4th form, etc. And the cast themselves were on the chairs. You can see behind me, they're 2 metres apart, and they weren't allowed initially to move from those chairs without restrictions. We had sanitizer and masks and all the usual things for public spaces, and also we had to limit the time we spent in rehearsals, and we had to make sure the area is well ventilated. It's all good things, all things that drama spaces aren't necessarily some of the time ventilated, and you spend a lot of time with them. But it's an interesting process to see how it could be done, and the cast and crew both all very quickly got to grips with how that would work, and they just, you know, hands up. And
yeah, well, it's that thing about conventions, isn't it?
Conventions very quickly reset.
Yeah, people don't see is that theatre looks like it's chaotic sometimes to people outside, but it's one of the most boundaried. It's about rules, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so I guess once you say to a cast you can't, they're used to working with those conventions in theatre. So is it the same with all the props as well?
The props are all individual. They all go back into the box for that actor. They put them back in themselves. They've been doing their own hair and makeup, with a little bit of guidance and advice from the makeup team and hair team. But so yeah, it's very much been a learning curve from that perspective, because normally our brief is to involve as many people as possible, but here it's been very much narrowed by that, which is a shame. But if the template works and we're able to do theatre like this, which I think we've proved that we can, then we can do more of these types of projects.
So one of the things that was really interesting for me on Monday, watching in here in the studio, watching a live stream, was there were 5 of us. Which is the maximum amount of audience we could have.
Yeah, that was the second change. So we had these restrictions for rehearsals, and we were planning to have full live audiences, as many as we could get in here. But the second lockdown means that we couldn't do it in the evening, because we're not allowed to do anything that isn't a standard extracurricular activity, and B, we had to make sure basically the audience had to all be in one bubble and socially distanced. So it was all staff on Monday.
It was very odd.
It was very odd.
But what was really nice was I think seeing people who had been on the stage crew and backstage technically on previous school shows suddenly now learning how to live stream. So Morgan's back there, like literally helping Ryan mix.
Morgan's running it. Morgan's calling the shots. Morgan was in rehearsals from day one, and that was a conscious choice to work out the angles and to work out when we could zoom in here and when. So
how could you just talk us through what is the equipment that makes you able to live stream
Yeah.
which the students are
Absolutely.
working on.
So it was very vital to me that it be a live experience rather than a film, because we learned a lot when we were making the Secret Diary in the summer, and we put some of that into practice here in terms of shots and angles. We made a film in McDonald's in Redhill, which is part of the action. But it was very crucial to me that we were capturing live theatre rather than making a film of live theatre. And it's interesting seeing different examples come out from the professional theatre. When they filmed Hamilton, they did over a few days and they had different close-up shots and things like that. The setup we have here, we have the camera that we're talking to here is our main camera which pans and zooms, moves around. There are two cameras, there's a camera over there which pans and zooms. There's a fixed wide shot in the middle there, and then there's another one over there, which is sort of a close-up camera for a couple of moments later on.
So there's 5 cameras in the room?
There are 4 cameras in the room, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 microphones, I think.
So there's float mics.
Float mics along this bar here.
And there's boom.
There are shotgun mics in the corner there, and then 2 mics, which I don't know the technical term for, and probably shotgun as well.
Welcome to Ragged Grammar. We're learning as we go.
And they all feed back into the control room, which is back there. It's not visible during the show, but there is Morgan and Ryan, and they are mixing it
shots
with a piece of hardware, mixing the shots, saying, well, let's cut to camera 2 and camera 1, and they've got headphone links to the camera operators, and they say, camera 1, can you find me a close-up of the character of Emily, because I know that there's a good bit coming up. They frame the close-up, and then they're like, and cut to camera 1 for that bit. So it's sort of like live TV, really. It's all the skills of the production room on live TV, but live film at the same time, and all operated by the students.
So what
they're
I'm
much better at it than us.
Yeah, better.
They know what they're doing.
What I'm intrigued by is the kind of, it's the absolute antithesis of everything that we kind of think about theatre, is that it's like theatre is a shared experience with people in a room. And I just wondered how that was, once you've known that you couldn't have an audience, how that then changes the work you do as a director in terms of what you have to hold on to and what you have to let go of.
Well, I think, as a director, it was that's not the most restricting thing. As a director, the most restricting thing is the lack of physical contact between the actors. So you're blocking everything with this idea in mind that you need to maintain space and distance, and we have, in a very safe way, broken that boundary at 2 points in the production deliberately, and there are masks and sanitizer in place for those moments as well. It's controlled, but that was sort of anti what we stand for normally. It was that idea of maintaining distance. They don't even make eye contact for most of the play. But with the change to not having an audience came very late in the day. That was last week that the government advice changed and prohibited it. But it does, and I think it's more difficult for the actors, because they, as an actor, you want to feed off the energy of an audience in the room, but you also want to feed off the adrenaline of that having a live audience gives you. So for having a tiny audience is almost worse than having no audience at all.
Yes, I mean, I was really conscious on Monday that there's me, you, Maz Hare, Hugh Jones, who's on the leadership team, and we're doing that slightly weird thing where you're kind of,
we were taking
like, this is a funny line, let's laugh really loudly to compensate for the fact that there aren't 150 people in the concert hall at Christmas.
But of course, the actors are drilled and used to there being the stakes of a live audience when they perform. So the difference not having an audience doesn't feel right, because it doesn't raise the adrenaline in the same way, and it doesn't get you into that zone. And so it's a really difficult balance, which theatre's going to have to find. And a lot of professional theatre is performing shows without audiences now, because that's the law at the moment, and they're trying to find other ways to do it. But also it's that line that it's sometimes better to have no one there, because you know that there's no one there, than to have one line you deliver get no reaction at all, and another line you deliver have the 3 people in the room laughing hysterically. It's more unpredictable.
Yeah, there was a show at Chichester which started a couple of weeks ago, where Chichester had opened the whole auditorium, and then the government regulations changed, so they had to do the show at the end of the week with no one. And I think that must have been a really difficult time for a group of actors to have suddenly felt that they were back, even with a socially distanced audience, but in an auditorium of 1,200 feeding off that response and then going to nothing. And so I think that's the difficulty about how you've had to change, and why, you know, the constant restrictions are forcing us to do different things in different ways.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it makes you appreciate that feeling of being in a shared experience, of being crammed into a small studio theatre with 100 people laughing at the same thing. It makes you appreciate that, where in the past you might have gone, oh, it's a bit hot in here, or, you know, the leg room's a bit small. I think there's going to be a period when we're allowed to do it again, when we massively appreciate that shared experience. And everyone's trying to find ways of having that shared experience. House party, Netflix group watching, social media has gone mad for people watching stuff at the same time. People breaking the law, absolutely, and getting together and doing it anyway. I heard the story about, I think it was somewhere in Germany, they had a Matrix-themed party, which they claimed was a film shoot to get round the restrictions. So they had 1,000 people shooting a film, dressed as characters from the Matrix, just having a party.
And it'd be really interesting to talk to the cast about their experience, about how they perform, because one of the things that, because we tend to operate in quite big ensemble shows, a lot of the students are used to being
We've never done something with 6 people in a studio, really, having, apart from exam work. But at its very base level, there's a difference between acting for camera and acting for film. So acting for stage, sorry.
Yeah.
So,
but that's what's really interesting about that process, I think, for you as a director this time, is that you've had to think about like a naturalistic performance that would have read to an audience of 30 people, but then switch it and then somehow coach actors to be aware of the camera, to not be aware of the camera. Like, are they? Aren't they?
Well, I think
do they start looking at the lens?
The actor has to be aware of the camera where the character isn't, which is an interesting.
So that duality is a nightmare. Well,
It's a process that takes some getting used to, which is what we're going to see as we do more of this. Is we're going to get more and more used to that duality, and I think we're going to understand it and accept it a bit more. And like anything, we adapt. And we try our best to make it work. It's been really fun, I have to say.
Really?
Yeah.
You found playing with gadgets really
have
fun?
Yeah. And also just doing live theatre. It's been a while. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure. It's great to hear about the experience itself, a little bit more detail.
Yeah.